Hey everybody, so here is the confounding problem and how you should work through it. This confounding problem goes through both testing to see if um, the confounding variable is an independent risk factor for the disease or the health outcome that you are interested in, as well as if your confounding variable is associated with the exposure that you're testing. So in this particular problem, the exposure is allergies, and asthma is the health outcome, and the place of residence is the confounding variable we're testing. So we're going to test to see if the relationship between allergies and asthma is actually confounded by where they live. So the first question, are allergy sufferers disproportionately distributed between the northern and southern U.S.? What is your evidence? So all this is asking is place of residence associated with allergies. And so to test that, we're just going to see if there are more allergy sufferers in the north than the south. And really one way you can think about this is what is the prevalence of allergies in each of these areas. So if the prevalence of allergies is greater in one place than the other, then we would determine that there is an association between our confounding variable, which is place of residence, and our exposure, which is allergies. So if we test that, we would see that 1,000 out of 2,600 people in the north suffer from allergies, and that's about 38%. And if we test how many people in the south have allergies, that will be 1,000 divided by 1,400. So we take all the people that have allergies in the south divided by the total population to give us what percentage of people that live in the south have allergies, and that gives us about 71%. And so we determined that yes, it is disproportionately distributed between the north and south. So allergies are associated with place of residence, and that's because these proportions are different. More people in the south suffer from allergies than people in the north. So there is an association there. And so going on to our next question, is place of residence an independent risk factor for asthma? So to do this, we have to see if place of residence is a risk factor for asthma in our non-exposed group. So if we remember that our exposure in this particular problem is allergies, our non-exposure will be the non-allergy sufferers. And so we can actually compute an incidence rate for asthma in both the north and the south. And so to do that, let's get the incidence in the north. And so if we remember that we're looking in our non-exposed group to get our incidence of asthma, that would be 160 divided by 1,600. And that'll be 0.1. And we can even calculate this out to get a per 1,000 rate. So we could get 100 per 1,000. And so that's out of 1,000 people that live in the north, 100 of them suffer from asthma. And so we can get an incidence rate for the south as well. And that's going to be 200 over 400. We can do the same thing. That's going to be 0.5. If we do a per 1,000 rate, that's going to give us 500 per 1,000. So out of 1,000 people in the south, 500 of them have asthma. And so before we even calculate a relative risk, we can just compare these incidence rates. And we can see that those that live in the south have much higher rates of asthma than those that live in the north. And so we just get our relative risk just to get an idea of the strength of that association. But really just looking at our incidence rates, we can see that there is an association between where people live and asthma. And that's because those that live in the south have much higher rates of asthma than those that live in the north. So if we get our relative risk, we do 0.5 divided by 0.1, and that'll equal 5, which means that those that live in the south are 5 times more likely to have asthma. Okay? So now we want to compare these stratum-specific rates in question number 3 to the relative risk of our entire study population. And so what we're looking at here is the rates of allergies to asthma. And so in our entire study population, we calculate out that relative risk of 600 divided by 2,000, and then divide that by 360 divided by 4,000. I'm sorry, 360 over 2,000. And that's going to give us a 1.666. So we'll just have it as 1.67. So in the northern U.S., if we calculate out a relative risk here, it would be 100 divided by 1,000. And that's divided by 160 over 1,600. And that's going to give us a relative risk of 1. And so we can even see from this relative risk here, it doesn't matter if people in the north have allergies or don't have allergies. They have asthma at the same rates. So we would determine that allergies are not really a risk factor for asthma in the north. And if we do the same thing for the south, we get 500 divided by 1,000, and then 200 divided by 400, and that will give us a relative risk of 1 as well. And so let's kind of bring these down. Now it looks a little bit better. So we determined that if we just look at allergies and asthma without controlling for place of residence, we see there is an association between allergies and asthma. But as we start to break that down by place of residence, we determine that the relationship between allergies and asthma are being confounded by the place of residence. So really this association that we see, this 1.67, is really being explained by where they live rather than the risk that allergies have toward asthma. So in this final question here, this place of residence is a confounder for the association between allergies and asthma. We can say that yes, so this evidence does show that that place of residence is a confounder for this relationship. So we found that in the first two problems. That's our method 1. That place of residence is associated with the exposure, which is allergies, and place of residence is also a risk factor for the health outcome, which is asthma. And so then we want to see if that relationship is strong enough to determine that this confounding variable is actually confounding the association between allergies and asthma. And we would say yes, it is. And that's because both of our stratum-specific rates, which is these two relative risks that we calculated for the north and the south, which were both 1, they're both less than the crude relative risk of 1.67. So remember, they have to either be both greater or both less. And so in this case, they're both less than our crude relative risk. And they also have to be at least 20% different than our crude relative risk. And so in most of our problems, you've seen that both of the stratum-specific rates are less than the crude relative risk. So we would say in this problem that the crude relative risk has to be at least 20% greater than our stratum-specific rates. And so to get that, we would calculate 20% of our crude relative risk, which is what this is right here at number 6. We get this 0.33. If we subtract that off, then we get 1.33. So after taking 20% off of our crude relative risk, we see that we're still greater than our stratum-specific rate. So we would determine that the crude relative risk is 20% different than our stratum-specific rates. And so what that is telling us is that that place of resonance is confounding that relationship so strongly that we would determine that it is a confounding variable to where the relationship between allergies and asthma can be contributed to place of residence rather than allergies actually being a risk for asthma. So hope that makes sense, and hope this can help you as you're studying confounding. And if you have any questions, make sure to let me know.